Four questions today. First one comes from the book of Exodus. It says that in Exodus, after the plagues, it records for some of them that Pharaoh went and asked Moses to plead for the plagues to stop, and other times it doesn't. So is there a significance with that? Does it imply anything? The simple answer is we don't know. The text does not tell us. It's highly possible that at times there were certain plagues that impacted Pharaoh a little bit more than others, perhaps personally. Perhaps he was getting more pressure from his officials and advisors. And when the pressure was increased, the urgency to go and plead for those plagues to be lifted was portrayed to Moses. So after the seventh plague, the plague of hail, he went to Moses and he said, Pharaoh sent and called Moses, and Aaron said to them, "This time I have sinned, and the Lord is in the right, and I and my people are in the wrong. Plead with the Lord, for there has been enough of God's thunder and hail, and I will let you go." Well, Moses went, prayed to the Lord, the hail stopped, and what do we read? Pharaoh's heart was hardened. So it seems there were some that impacted him more than others. The next couple come from the book of Matthew in the New Testament. First one is in Matthew chapter 12, verse 5. It says, "Can you explain what we're reading about the Sabbath here?" Matthew 12:5 says, "Or have you not read in the law how on the Sabbath the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are guiltless?" What does it mean that the priests profaned the Sabbath? Well, the priests in the temple, in fact, violated Sabbath law by performing their work on the Sabbath. So it's basically an exception for the priests who were commanded to offer certain sacrifices on the Sabbath, even though they were breaking Sabbath law and therefore profaning Sabbath law. It was okay, in fact, decreed for them to do that. So it shows us what Matthew goes on and other gospel writers tell us. Jesus tells us that the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Sabbath is there to serve man, to be a day of rest for man. It is not this rigid thing that man was to follow. And the very 3 verses later, verse 8 of chapter 5 or chapter 12 says, "For the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath." So he's saying if these priests were able to do this, how much more appropriate is it the Son of Man use the Sabbath in a way that is different from what it was prescribed? The next question also comes from Matthew chapter 16. The very last verse says, "Truly I say to you, there are some standing here who will not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom." What does it mean that there are some that are standing there with Jesus that will not taste death until the kingdom comes, the Son of Man coming in his kingdom? We have to understand placement in the book of Matthew is really, really significant. Matthew's constantly talking about this offer of the kingdom, which as you read through Matthew, you see that coming kingdom comes in different phases at different times. And so there's little glimpses of the kingdom that are offered. The very next thing after we read this verse is chapter 17 and the transfiguration. And what happens there? Well, some of his disciples, Peter, James, and John, they see a glimpse of the Son of Man who is transfigured, changed before their eyes, where they see a glimpse of his glory and his kingdom power at the transfiguration. It's also possible that this refers to another phase of God's kingdom coming, and that is after the first resurrection. After Christ is resurrected, what do they see? They see the Son of Man and his new kingdom body standing before them. So there's a couple of different options and a couple of different meanings there for that verse. The last question comes from the book of Acts chapter 18, verse 18, which speaks of Paul cutting his hair. It says this, "At Caesarea, he had cut his hair, for he was under a vow." And the question is what's the significance of this vow? Assuming it's a Nazirite vow, is it not a Nazirite vow? Vows in the Old Testament were often voluntary things done by Jews to show their devotion and worship and honor of the Lord. One of those was the Nazirite vow. You might be familiar with Samson in the Old Testament. Part of his Nazirite vow was to not cut his hair. And so it appears that there was some sort of vow that Paul was under, perhaps a Nazirite vow, where he didn't cut his hair, and then at Cenchrea he did cut his hair. What we do know about Paul is that he was a very, very devout Jew prior to his Damascus Road experience and his conversion to follow Jesus Christ. And so it seems as though some of Paul's Jewish customs and practices were so deeply ingrained in him that as long as they were not against or opposed to his new faith in Christ, he continued some of those Jewish customs to show his devotion to the Lord. So making a vow and either cutting his hair or not cutting his hair would have been a way for him to show that worship and devotion. Perhaps even such gestures allowed Paul to talk more freely with his fellow Jews and gave him sort of an inroad for the sharing of the gospel, because we read in 1 Corinthians 9, verse 20, that Paul, to the Jews, he became like a Jew. To those under the law, he became as one under the law, even though he acknowledged he's not under the law. Why? So that he might win those who are under the law. And so we don't know exactly what the significance of this vow was, but we'll read about him mentioning vows again and a few other people later on in Acts. So keep your eyes peeled for the mention of a vow again. But we don't exactly know what this was talking about, but clearly I think it's showing his devotion to the Lord, and he was expressing his devotion to the Lord through this vow. Keep reading the Bible.